in focusing upon the character of God and speaking primarily of the character of love, I am not exhausting by this a discussion of the character of God. I chose to focus on the most central and encompassing aspect of the character of God, and therefore the most reliable. Attributes of God, such as mercy and kindness and compassion and long-suffering, are contained within the descriptor love. Well, love is not a romantic notion. Love is a statement of being that encompasses all these other attributes. So love in 1 Corinthians 13 is patient, kind, long-suffering, keeps no record of wrongs. Love always protects. Love always hopes. Love always perseveres. Just as God is merciful, kind to the generations of the righteous, and patient with the wicked, but eventually will judge the wicked. It's the rarest of things for God to suddenly judge anybody or any circumstance, because among the qualities of his love is the intent of redemption, to bring you back to the original intents of God. But what he does and when he does it depends upon what he knows and how what he knows is to be understood within the eternal context of his will for whomever he created. He's not willing that any should perish, because his love is long-suffering and patient. But to say that it is not, no one will perish is nonsense, because there is no ultimate fellowship with light and darkness. And man was given the right to choose, because if he were not given the right to choose, he could not choose to agree with God and thus allow himself to be conformed to the standard of God. But if you give choice in regards to the good, choice goes the other way as well. You must allow evil to exist. And so we have the question that people ask routinely: why are there evil people who do bad things that affect good people? If you begin that inquiry and end that inquiry with human life and this world, there are no good answers. You have to view things from God's viewpoint, which is eternal. And between now and agelessness and timelessness, there is this life, there are the ages past, and there's the millennial age coming, a time of 1,000 years or so, in which what is unfinished in this life will be finished then. And over that realm, the flesh, humanity, physical life, and the natural world exerts almost no sway at all. Because with the return of the Lord, all of the physical aspects of life will change. We do not yet know what it'll be like. except in glimpses, like when Jesus was resurrected from the dead, and he lived in a body that was quite different from the one he had while he was on the earth. One that was not limited by gravity, limited by spatial, temporal constraints, or even form. So it's not especially beneficial for us to dwell upon these things, inasmuch as this life is a preparation for that life, but merely to point out that if for us choice is defined by our humanity and the realities of the present order of things, then sometimes they're not good answers, simply because they're never complete answers when the context by itself is limited. If you ask a question, can you see the curve of the earth? How do you know the earth is round? Well, if you're standing on the plains of Nebraska or the steppes, the likelihood is you'll see a long way, but you won't see the curve of the earth because your elevation does not allow you to have that sensory experience. But if you were to take a ride in space, we could see the whole earth all at once, then hardly a question as to what is the shape of the earth. So your elevation often provides the answers or keeps you from knowing what the answers are. Doesn't mean there aren't answers, just means you are poorly situated to have the answers. In the pursuit of knowing who God is, the thing that is indisputably valuable is that you become familiar with the consistency of his character. He is actually who he says he is. And his reliability is the function of his consistency. Now, I repeated portions of that so I could move on into a different discussion. The evidence of things not seen. Faith, which in Hebrews, the 6th chapter, is described as faith toward God. The term faith is further defined over in the 11th chapter of the same book, Hebrews. So in Hebrews 11, which is a book called, or it's a chapter that is devoted almost exclusively to a discussion of persons of faith. It begins that discussion with this statement, which is a continuation from 6 chapters earlier. Books of the Bible, in case you haven't thought about it, books of the Bible aren't just verses here and verses there. Books of the Bible often identify particular themes and through many chapters develop those themes and move them forward, much like I'm doing here. I recognize, you see, that we really are dealing with a generation of people who are biblical illiterates. If the friends group is the source of your Bible knowledge, you're so far behind that it's pathetic. Because the most of what you will get from your friends group is what they learned in Sunday school. about the age of 12. So you kind of see, there's this new phenomenon called Bible influencers, and they travel around. Usually they're pretty good comic relief for churches that want some way to excite their young people. And one of the ones I saw was about, young people groups who are traveling groups of musicians and preachers. And usually their venues are church buildings on youth nights. That's kids teaching kids. So needless to say, their teachings are heavily anecdotal and appeal almost exclusively to the reason and emotions of young people's souls. But in a world where friends groups have supplanted truth, when friends groups circulate the collective lack of understanding of the group, and it passes for information, nothing is advanced of a serious nature. Now, the coolest restaurant, the newest styles, travel tips, reflections on your suffering, things you concluded because you suffered some misfortune, or those things are about what social media promotes. We're here on a social media platform precisely because we know that there is a tragic deficit of real understanding. Because there's a tragic deficit of real information, of real knowledge, rather. Facts aren't knowledge. Information is not knowledge. They lack a template for the interpretation of these things that people know in light of the reality of God. Pay attention to that last phrase, in light of the reality of God. So what happens accidentally is, actually it happens by default, that agreements actually take the place of revelation and insight. Whatever the friends group agrees to, that has to be God. Because, hey, they agree. And the shock and surprise is when you try to put those things to work for you, they don't work. And you're just as nervous going to the interview. You're just as predictable leaving a relationship and entering another one to wash and rinse and repeat and keep going. And that's why these trite sayings, they're so shallow that the only surprise is that anyone believes them. I've got to look out for myself. If I don't look out for myself, who will? I've learned a lot from my ex. Well, what did you learn? How did you interpret what you learned? If you are, and your friends' standards are, the standard by which you learn, you're going to repeat the same thing. And growing old and disappointed and cynical, look at all the people around you who've gotten old without answers. They've become cynical. So what do? you carve out a life that you basically control. I was reading this piece the other day about this 60-year-old woman who had, quote unquote, given up on dating because she didn't need a man. She had her apartment in the city, and she had a place out in Martha's Vineyard, and she could go to the theater and cultural events and visit museums and take trips overseas with no entanglements. And I heard in all of that the loneliness of someone who adopted standards that were her own standards and buttressed by her friends over years. And in the end, she settled for some things that pretty well marked out her territory. That's not living. That's saying, I got mine, and what you got doesn't keep the shadow of death from tormenting you. So we reach into these media to try to say something else, something from God. Faith, you see, is a way of living, and it does not desert you when you're north of 70. It's the substance of things hoped for, and I talked about that earlier when we talked about epistemology. And it is the evidence of things not seen. So here is what is said, Hebrews 11, verse 1. Now faith, and it's the same word as faith toward God, the word pistis. Faith is the substance of things hoped for. Hebrews 11, 1. The evidence of things not seen. Now, the evidence of things not seen means that in this world, in the visible world, you will be given evidences that induce you to rely on the things you cannot see. And this is one of the components of faith. You can't see God, but you may have confidence in Him. Why? Because the reliability of the nature of God is measurable, subject to evidentiary things. So it behooves us to talk a little bit about how God talks to us. One of the main ways God speaks to us is in visions and dreams. One of the things that we wonder about is what are the meanings of our dreams? Now, not all dreams represent communication with God. And in the main, God speaks to us in visions and dreams. Let me pause here for just a second and give you just a kind of a running list of evidences of the presence of God because He speaks to us in ways such as these. God speaks to us by revelation. You know, sometimes you're reading along in the Bible and something jumps out at you, and you will even say that. It jumped out at me. Well, that's revelation. God is speaking to you in a way you ordinarily wouldn't speak to yourself or even know how to speak to yourself. He speaks to you in visions and dreams and revelation. Speaks to you in numbers. Numbers like 12, and 7, 3, and 4, 10, and 40. numbers like that, because they mean something. In the text of Scripture, they mean something. God also speaks to you in experiences that you have with people and just in circumstances around your life. One of the main set of experiences through which God speaks to you, frankly, is in the sudden provision for you of things that you weren't even thinking about, or even let alone asking for. Or you may have just had a thought about it with no dwelling on it, and God gave it to you. Experiences where you did ask, and God answered you to the penny or to the object. That usually happens when He's trying to teach you to rely on His existence even though you can't see Him. So I could go on, but I wanted to focus a little bit on visions and dreams and the value of visions and dreams as a communications model between you and the Lord. Now, that communication model can typically involve all three aspects of your being: your spirit, your soul, and your body. Now, the fact that God speaks to people in visions and dreams is well documented in the Scriptures. Joseph was a dreamer. God gave him visions and dreams as to where his life was going when he was still a boy. And those were pretty exalted visions and dreams. God supplied Daniel and elevated him from a captive to the chief of the governors of ancient Babylon through visions and dreams. John was on the island of Patmos and had visions and dreams of the future. So visions and dreams are extremely powerful communicative tools by which God invites us into understandings we do not normally have. In the main, a vision or a dream allows us to have a future experience or to revisit a past experience without the trauma associated with aspects of the dream. But we are fully, all of our senses are alive, which is why I said that it involves the body, the soul, and the spirit. God may totally involve us, spirit, soul, and body, through a vision or a dream in an experience without exposing us to the jeopardy, the harm, the consequences even, that might be true if that vision or dream were instead an actual occurrence. What do I mean? For example, when you wake up out of a particularly harrowing dream, all of your senses are, or most of your senses, are fully awakened. You may sweat, your heart may race, you may perspire. Your five senses, or at least some of your five senses, may be fully engaged. You're having an experience, but not really. Because if you actually had the experience, there might have been very harmful consequences to you, or you might have committed very harmful acts that damaged other people. But in that vision and in that dream, you will have experiences of interacting. And those interactions may be with both the natural world and the supernatural world. People often have dreams of interactions with demons. People often have dreams in which their interactions with demons also involve humans who may be the carriers of these demonic forces. In which case, this might be a warning to you that certain relationships expose you to the potential of interaction with the demonic. So, for example, if this is a totally made-up example, if you dream you were at a party and someone was trying to get you to leave the party with them. Again, I'm speaking to a YouTube audience. And you might have been in a state of reduced consciousness, whether by drugs or alcohol or both. And for no reason that you could actually articulate, you felt endangered. And you took action that avoided the circumstance. What would you consider that dream is about? It is too close to reality to some people to be ignored. It's perhaps at this time God is drawing you, calling you, whether to return to the faith of an earlier time in your life or for the first time in your life, to be aware that there are invisible actors moving in your circumstance, and your unheeded going forward is likely to be dangerous to you. You may find that the dream might involve poor choices you made, and you ended up running for your life. Or the dream might involve a journey or a choice or a decision that you might have made that brought you great joy, or comfort, or hope. It might be something that came at a time when you're particularly depressed. So God gives us visions and dreams as a way of experiencing a thing, whether by warnings, cautions, or encouragement, or a range of other things in between, so that when the thing does in fact unfold in real life, you're forewarned or you're counseled ahead of time. These are evidences of things not seen. Now, for the person who walks with God, one of the elements or qualities of growth for them is to reach the place where they are discerning as to what dreams are from God and what dreams are just the results of having your supper that was reacting to you, or you reacting to it later in the night. Because the voice of God becomes increasingly distinct and clear and separate from either the voice of your enemy or your own voice. And a vision or a dream from God will have an effect of upgrading you, alerting you, giving you a different level, a vantage point of understanding. And it's about as definitive a bit of evidence of things that cannot be seen, but are real and likely to affect your life. So, faith toward God is to attribute value and not to consider it mere coincidence that God speaks to you in all of the variety of ways in which He does. It is normal to hear God. It's normal for your spirit to hear God. And God is not just speaking to you or calling to you at the point where you decide you're going to have a relationship with Him. He's doing that all the time, in the hope that something will break through to you and you will decide to seek Him. We'll move on toward other aspects of the elementary doctrines, but faith toward God follows repentance from acts that lead to death. When we come back, we'll move on in the further discussions of these things. I'm Sam Solon, and I'll see you then. Goodbye for now.
May mercy, grace, and peace be with you always. Thank you for watching.